We're all owned by the syndicate, body and soul. Or should I just say body?
Hello, filthy movie lovers, something weirdos, and anti-criterion bros, to the 13th episode of The Sin Syndicate, the only podcast that has witnessed the Smut Racket pizza parlor turf war and adheres to the credo, no second drafts. My name is Gentry Austin, writer and researcher, and I'm here with my co-host, adult film historian Casey Scott. And today we're joined by a special guest, Will Sloan, a Toronto-based author who has written a new critical study of director Edward D. Wood, Jr., entitled Ed Wood, Made in Hollywood, USA. We reached out to Will for his expertise on Wood's career leading into the 60s, a time that saw significant change in his personal and professional life. And we specifically focused our discussion around his 1960 sexploitation crime film, The Sinister Urge. Before we introduce Will Sloan, we had a few quick updates regarding Pete Perry, who we discussed last week. I received my hot off the presses copy of the Kino Lorber Something Weird Nudie Cutie triple feature disc. Mr. Peter's Pets is the main feature, and that is directed by Pete Perry, according to Lisa Petrucci's notes under the pseudonym.
I think it says Dick Crane, right? Yeah, it's Dick Crane. But that still doesn't answer my question. Dick Crane was a real person who knew Dan Sonny, who produced the movie. So I'm still not convinced. I still have my theory that he knew Dick Crane, and Dick Crane was like, yeah, use my name on this or something. I would like a little more background on that.
Yeah, it's still possible. But yeah, Lisa
I do believe that he directed it. Yeah.
But he only used it that one time, right? It would have been for this picture.
Yeah. Because Dick Crane was a real guy, and he didn't work on. I mean, he might have even worked on that movie in some capacity in the crew, because he was, related to Dan Sonny. Yeah, if he didn't do anything else, and he maybe didn't work on the other movies, then, and I think it feels like Pete kind of wanted to develop his own regularly usable pseudonym, because Stootsberry, I think, is his most popular one, and that shows up on a lot of them.
Yeah, so in the release, there's also a chapter that Lisa includes from David Friedman's autobiography, Kings of Babylon. It's from the second unpublished volume, but it's called The Land of Milk and Sunny, and he writes about meeting Pete Perry, and this might be the only description I've ever read of his appearance, which Dave describes as being tall and skinny. So you just said he's very personable. Dave writes, with a sense of humor matching mine. So there's something to go off of, I guess, when we're looking at old behind the scenes pictures, is look for a tall, thin guy in the background.
Yes. And I would hope, just based on his reputation as a ladies' man, I think Dave wouldn't probably have noted this, but I assume he was also quite good looking, because he didn't have any problem with the ladies. So
Dave Friedman also notes that he was impressed when he first arrived in Hollywood that Perry's studio was, it was makeshift and it was small, but he had a nice lighting rig set up, and he had cubicles for the dressing rooms and the camera loading booths. So pretty immediately, Dave was impressed with what Pete was doing out there and started working with him. He also noted that Pete was a native Chicagoan, a graduate of the Goodman School of Theater, and he credits Revenge of the Virgins to Pete.
But I think he did direct it. I keep trying to find sources for this, and that was something that I think in our last episode I was kind of like, well, I think it was shot as a Western, and then the nude stuff was inserted. I don't think it was. I think it was shot one way. I think it was shot as a standard movie so that the other actors didn't know there was going to be nudity. And then like on another shooting schedule, they shot the nudity. Because if you watch it, the editing of it it's like seeing two movies at once, but the style is still very similar. And it is similar to Honeymoon of Terror. It has that same look to it. So, and it's really shocking to me that it is the only movie in the genre that Pete Perry not only uses his real name, his full name, Peter Perry Jr., which it feels like he made this one time mistake, and then after that he was like, okay, we're not doing that anymore. Or maybe it was something the distributor did he didn't know they were going to do.
Probably furious.
And then so it's kind of like, we're not doing that anymore. We're going to use fake names on everything,
going back
right?
And fixing it.
Right. So it's tough to deny that he did that movie. I don't know why I thought that was some other Western that was unfinished and then was picked up and with nude scenes in it, because maybe that was another movie I was thinking of, but that is not the case. So that is a correction to my error last week.
Well, Will, thanks for coming on. Do you want to introduce your book?
Great. Well, my book is called Ed Wood, Made in Hollywood, USA. It's a critical study of Ed Wood's career. Ed Wood, I think he needs no introduction to this audience, right? Y'all know who Ed Wood is. Right. But the book is an attempt to sort of locate the artistic personality in Ed Wood from, his humble beginnings to his humble ends. And I'm particularly interested in some of the stuff that came, after the Tim Burton movie.
Yeah, and after the Rudolph Gray book, right?
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Yeah. Although the Rudolph Gray book, definitely a touchstone, because he really, Rudolph Gray really gets into the steep decline of Ed Wood's life. And that book is really the foundational text. So huge debt of gratitude to that.
Well, tell us about kind of your beginnings with Ed. I feel like we all kind of have a story with how we first experienced Ed Wood. What was yours?
Well, I think I was 7 years old, and I asked my dad what the worst movie of all time was. And he said Plan 9 from Outer Space. And I don't know if he had just sort of ambiently absorbed in culture that it was the worst. I'm pretty sure he had seen the Tim Burton movie. So I remember he said, oh, there's a movie called Robot Monster as well, where like a guy's fighting a rubber octopus and he's like putting the octopus all over him. And it took me years to figure out that he was conflating two different movies there. But anyway, I rented Plan 9 from Outer Space from the video store. Blockbuster it was, and that began a sort of lifelong journey with Ed Wood.
I think me being like a 90s kid who grew up in Minneapolis, I could not escape the Mystery Science Theater Ed Wood recordings. So I think for a lot of kids as well, and a lot of people probably like older than 30s, that's their first experience with Ed Wood. I was going to ask about your book with regard to coming out now, I think is the perfect time, because I think we're far enough away from, treating Ed as this, cross-dressing, freak, that we can talk about his work seriously. Would you agree?
This is kind of what it's all about. I feel like in my lifetime, I've seen the critical reception of, especially Glenn or Glenda shift. Like I remember, when like Harry and Michael Medved were touring that movie as like the world's worst film festival in the early 80s, it was largely a male cis heterosexual audience who was kind of laughing at it. And there's a lot that's funny about that movie, but I feel like in the last 10 years, as there's been an explosion of interest in the history of queer and trans cinema and representation, that movie has been reclaimed in a lot of quarters as a pioneering, though obviously complicated artifact. some of that has extended as well to the rest of his filmography. I also think in the last 15 years, maybe the last 20 years, certainly since the Burton film, there's been such an explosion in the availability of his work beyond Plan 9 from Outer Space, Bride of the Monster, that stuff. Movies like Necromania, The Young Marrieds, The Only House in Town, Taken Out in Trade especially. His literature is more widely available. There have been excellent compilations edited by Bob Blackburn of his short stories. It's easier to find sort of bootleg copies or even legitimate copies of his novels. And all of this, I think, has created a fuller picture of him as an artist. I don't know if it's necessarily like there are a lot of movies that are not beating the bad movie allegations, but there's a fuller picture of him, you know?
Oh, yeah. Casey, what was your first Ed Wood? I'm curious.
Well, my introduction was through the Medveds, was through the Golden Turkey Awards. And I made it my goal to see every movie in that book. But I don't think I got to see one of his movies until I had first gotten a copy of Rhino's Ed Wood Look Back in Angora, which I still love. And it's one of the only places Joseph F. Robertson is interviewed about working in sex films at all, which is frustrating because I love his work as an adult film director. And then I think the first one I saw probably was Plan 9. And I remember loving it and really becoming obsessed with Vampira. And then Glen or Glenda, then I saw one version and then I heard rumblings about another one and I never could find it. So I think the last one I saw was Night of the Ghouls, because that one took forever to get a hold of. Yeah, I definitely went through my Ed Wood phase. And I definitely remember the MSC3K episodes. I personally love MSC3K. It opened my eyes to a lot of cinema that now I watch unironically. Like I unironically love Man of the Hands of Fate. I feel like it's like some weird garage rock anti-cinema. I unironically love Beasts of Yucca Flats. Like, you know, so as a gateway to bad movies, I think the Medveds and MSC3K are kind of cut from the same cloth, but it's very interesting to see how, you know, when you get into the cinema and the larger universe of not only like quote unquote bad cinema, but just like exploitation films, you start to see them differently. And so you can acknowledge the badness of some of them, but there's also something charming about them. So after a while, I mean, I developed different directors that I loved way more than Ed Wood, but he kind of was my first director that I really kind of was like, I need to own all of this stuff. And I still love Jailbait. I don't think people talk about Jailbait enough.
Yeah, I love Jailbait.
I love Jailbait.
Really good. Yeah, I love Jailbait. And I feel like that gets short shrift because it's not a monster movie, because it's like a film noir with not terrible acting and there's some good photography in it. I actually think it's not bad.
Well, and also I feel like once he got labeled the worst director of all time, it sort of, for a while at least, made it harder to appreciate some of the movies that didn't fit into that paradigm. So, you know,
we're talking about the good ones, right?
Like you're watching Jailbait, which in a lot of ways it's a sort of failed film noir, but it's like the tombstones aren't falling over, there's no flying saucer on a string,
right?
Whatever is bad about it is sort of more conceptual or more atmospheric.
Right.
And so yeah, that's another thing I kind of want to do with this book, is to try to, I don't know, help people put on their Ed Wood goggles to appreciate all this other stuff.
It's a lot of film. Glory's got big business. Yeah.
You know, Casey, you mentioned something about that resonated with me about it's easy for people to forget how hard it was to see a director's complete career, like up until like, I don't know, 10 years ago, basically. Like
exactly.
You know, you were so much at the mercy of your local video store. So if you lived in a small town with like a bad video store and no library, you know, you'd read about some of these movies for years. That documentary, Ed Wood Look Back in Angora, happened to be at my local video store. And so, you know, there are things about that documentary I don't like, but it also, the interviews are great. And it has all these clips from The Love Feast and Orgy of the Dead, which when I was like 11 years old or whatever watching that, I was like, what are these? These look insane.
It felt very dirty. I was like, I just want to know about these black and white monster movies. I don't. That might have been one of my earliest introductions to anything remotely pornographic was in that. And it's interesting because it was directed by Ted Newsom, who would later write adult movies. So it's, and he just recently passed away. But there's a lot I don't like about that doc either. There's a lot of use of like PD footage to comment on stuff, which I don't love. But for a while, it was impossible to get a hold of. I feel like S'mores Entertainment might have reissued it. I don't remember now.
I think it's because Warner Brothers owns that documentary because they bought a lot of the Rhino catalog. So
that makes sense. Yes. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So I mean, it's you can find it on YouTube, but certainly not legitimately. I think the last legitimate release it was on that DVD of The Love Feast, where it was retitled "Pretty Models All in a Row."
So it had like a brown paper bag cover.
That's right. That's right.
Yeah, I remember that. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I was revisiting Rudolph Gray's book, and he doesn't even barely talk about stuff like Young Marrieds, which has me really interested in reading your book, Will, to see like how do you structure it. I'm sure you talk about it.
Yeah, it's chronological basically. Although particularly like when I'm talking about Glenn or Glenda, that's a great opportunity to bring up the way some of the themes recur throughout the rest of his career. So I think I bring up the Young Marrieds a bit in that context. I bring up some of his fiction in that context. But yeah, I went with a basically sturdy chronological study because I wanted to show how certain themes begin and then recur and develop for the rest of his life.
Well, I don't think for Young Marrieds, I feel like that's a recent discovery that he made that, isn't it? I think it's relatively recent that he was responsible for that. Yeah, and then I think there was another one that I don't know. I keep seeing people attaching his name to stuff, but I don't see any sources cited for that. So I'm immediately kind of like, okay, I'll take this with a grain of salt. But Young Marrieds, I think is well established if that's his. Yeah.
Yeah, there's plenty of evidence for that one. The one that's, I think, the most questionable attribution that's sort of been brought into the canon is a movie called Panty Girls, or also known as Bloomer Girl.
Yeah, which I've seen, and I guess is because there's a cat fight, like there is an only house in town. Like I don't know where that's coming from. Well, so yeah, if you have any info on where that information is from, I would love to know.
I mean, the whole film is like obsessed with women's undergarments. So
I mean, that's the chief evidence. It's a fan attribution that I think it showed up for the first time on this website called The Hunt for Edward D. Wood Jr. And it was listed as just a fan attribution. Some fan somewhere identified this. Joe Blevins, who's,
I love
a
Joe.
real scholar.
I've known Joe for years. Yeah.
He's looked at the movie and he thinks it might be Ed. I know that the late, great Greg Javert, who, also knows a lot. I talked to him about it. He was less convinced. I mean, the other evidence for it is the opening scene where it's is it Rick Lutz who stars in that movie? Rick Lutz is doing this.
It's Rick and Renee.
Right. He's doing this like monologue. He's this fashion photographer, and he gives this monologue that begins with something like, the clothes do make the man. And I don't know, it's maybe a minute of him talking that sounds like Ed. It sounds kind of like him, but it's, I don't know, I'm missing the smoking gun here. There's just not enough. And then you think, okay, if he did make it, does it matter? Because it's such a cheap and personality free movie, but
it's not great. All I remember about it is that cat fight. That's it, between Cindy Summers and Renee Bond, and it's over very quickly, and then that's it. That's literally all I remember about that shitty movie. It's shot in one house. Like it has no personality. That's why when I saw his name getting attached to it, I was like, how and why?
I want to believe.
Yeah, right. Because we all want to think he made more movies. It wasn't just like, especially because there's so many movies from that era in the adult cinema of LA with no credits. So it's kind of like, well, who made this? It really feels like it kind of has turned into a free-for-all. I see Anthony Spinelli's name on a lot of movies. I'm like, what is the evidence? I think Nymphocycler is another one that I feel like maybe Joe Robertson directed that, though I know Casey Lorraine, who I love, has said she remembers him directing her in that, but I don't know if it's because he was on screen. Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, that's a Casey Lorraine's testimony is interesting, although I think it's maybe a little unreliable because she insists that Take It Out and Trade, The Love Feast, and Nymphocycler were all the same production, and that Ed Wood was in charge. Now, Take It Out and Trade is clearly a different production than those other two. The other two, maybe the other two. Right. And I think she's also said that there were at least some scenes that Joseph Robertson directed. So I don't know. When I look at The Love Feast, I guess authorship is murky, but The Love Feast kind of feels like Ed to me. At the very least, it feels like a strong collaboration because, I just go back to that scene at the end where he's in the negligee and he's got the dog collar around and he says a line. Somebody asks him, do you know about bootlicking? And he says, I was in the service. And that's such an Ed Wood like thing to say. I don't know. Right.
That movie feels made up though. So it definitely feels like an Ed Wood thing to say. He's the one saying it. So he's I feel like he probably wrote it. I don't know that it looks like all the Joseph F. Robertson stuff from that era too.
And it's in the same house as all the other Joseph F. Robertson films. It's the same bed.
Exactly.
So authorship is murky. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Well, and maybe Joseph F. Robertson made Panty Girls. That's possible too. We'll just never know.
And I think, the other case for him as the director of those films, Ed, that is what an overbearing presence he was on sets. Like Conrad Brooks often tells a story about how like in the late 40s or the early 50s, he hired Ed to shoot this little home movie just to operate the camera with him and his brothers. And Ed basically just took over and he was like, no, you don't want a medium shot here. You want a close up. You want this, you want that. And some of the only kind of behind the scenes footage we have of Ed is in the shooting of that home movie with Conrad Brooks. And, Ed is clearly such a dynamic figure on the set. He's so enthusiastic about, shooting this home movie. So I could see him I could see Joseph F. Robertson caring less than Ed Wood on those sets.
That's true. And if Conrad Brooks says you're overbearing, then if
great,
one
great
of the
man,
most overbearing people that I've ever, I love Conrad. I've met him at multiple conventions, but if someone with that size personality thinks that you're overbearing, you might want to dial it down.
Yeah.
What's up, man?
Found another girl.
Where?
Same place, the park.
Oh, no.
Should we back up about a decade and look at... So setting the table here, I reached out to Will about talking about an Ed Wood movie. And when I suggested The Sinister Urge, I think you were a little excited because nobody wants to talk about Sinister Urge. Why is that? Is it just because it's another, doesn't have any UFOs and monsters in it? Because I think that there's a lot here for Ed Wood fans of those films, wouldn't you say?
Yeah, I think it doesn't have certain of the obvious surface delights of Plan 9 from Outer Space. I also think it's just a little, even compared to Jailbait, it's a little grimy, it's a little seedy. I think it's not as ingratiating a film. It doesn't have like Bela Lugosi in it. It doesn't have a star of that magnitude. The Ed Wood players who are in it are kind of, God love them, but Duke Moore and Kenny Duncan aren't quite as charismatic as Bela Lugosi. And good God, Carl Anthony, one of the worst performances of all time.
Really rough.
It's missing certain of those sparks. And I do think it's a movie that really comes to life if you read Hollywood Rat Race, if you're thinking about his career as a whole, if you're thinking of this as the gateway film to the next stage of his career, and the fact that it's like an anti-pornographic movie, allegedly, by a man who was on the cusp of becoming a full-time pornographer. That's interesting.
Yeah, that's what I find so interesting about it. Is it feels like it's coming at both like the end of things and the beginning of new things. And it even features people that were involved in the silent movie industry, right? Will is cinematographer.
Harry Oh yeah. Well, William C. Thompson, the cinematographer, obviously, but also Buster Keaton's brother, Harry Keaton, is in this movie as one of the pornographers. I enjoy his presence. I think he brings a little spark to his scenes.
The dirty picture racket can be directly connected to a good percentage of the major crimes in this city. Just how? We'd need a psychiatrist to explain it to you.
I was going to ask, about, what Ed's life was like when he was making Sinister Urge, at the turn of the decade here going into the 60s, like professionally, personally.
I think he would have been recovering from a number of personal and professional disappointments. I feel like there's a bit of a momentum in his life and career, like a modest momentum, but nevertheless a momentum kind of up to and including Bride of the Monster. He's making connections. He's got Lugosi, which is not nothing. That gets him a lot of his opportunities early on. And then after Lugosi's death, and also I think an underrated aspect after his partner Dolores Fuller left him. And it can be debated how much Dolores Fuller contributed, but she seems to have been a stabilizing influence on him. She was a real health nut, for example. She disapproved of the drinking. He seems to have, I think, gone down a bit of a bad path with that, maybe as a consequence of her leaving. But then also Plan 9 from Outer Space, he lost control of that film. Nobody, least of all the Baptists, and also not him, made any money on that film. Mm-hmm. Night of the Ghouls, aka Revenge of the Dead, sitting on a laboratory shelf. Yeah. And here he is repurposing, another project, this juvenile delinquency movie that he made in the 50s into this film. And you can just feel, compared to Bride of the Monster, especially, which is, I guess, the closest he ever got to a professional production, you just feel like this is a few steps back. Yeah, you feel the sense of the air coming out of the balloon professionally and personally for him.
Casey and I were talking offline about Sinister Urge. Our interest in it is from the sexploitation angle, of course. And, there's lots of evidence to say this is one of the early, roughies. Are you familiar with the roughies?
Yes, I am familiar with the roughies. Although, Casey, you might have to help me out about exactly where this falls into the chronology. Like, I think of stuff like, a smell of honey, a swallow of brine, stuff like that. Like, this was did this predate stuff. Those films? Yeah.
Very much.
Because this would have been like, this is like immoral Mr. T's era, kind of.
Yeah. Right.
Yes, God, this was the year. This was 60, so it was a year after Immoral Mr. T's. So we were moving in this direction, and that's why it's so interesting, because Immoral Mr. T's kind of, because we touched on Nudie Cuties and talked about those all last week. That was kind of the direction of where sexploitation was going for this grimy expose. Very atypical for that genre. It's actually more in tune with the old roadshow movies of warning about corruption. When you come to the big bad cities, you have this innocent girl who's corrupted. I think most people credit Scum of the Earth, which is 63, as being the first roughie. And Dave Friedman would say The Defilers was the first roughie, which was 65. And it's weird because Scum of the Earth is another one of these pornography expose movies, but it was shot in Chicago. Very similar, but Sinister Urge was first. The only one I could think of that is sort of sleazy and scummy as Sinister Urge is The Lonely Sex, which I think Tim Lucas started directing people to check that one out, which is good because there is something very sleazy and gross about that.
In The Lonely Sex, there's a woods scene where he's chasing a girl, and it's very similar to what you see in this scene in the opening and later when Dirk is stabbing women on the riverbanks there. Yeah, it's very similar. And even the music has that crescendoing orchestral music you hear in all the roughies. So I mean, Ed was definitely the roughie didn't take off till half a decade later, but I feel like Ed was ahead of the curve in that regard.
But, I think you're right to bring up the roadshow exploitation movies, because I think he was probably accidentally prescient here. He probably was thinking of that roadshow model, because I feel like consistently in his career, he's anywhere between 5 and 20 years behind the times. His next major credit is Orgy of the Dead, which comes like smack dab in the middle of the Ruffy era. And it may as well have, it's already so antiquated by the time that comes out.
Nobody wants to
because we touched on that one. We touched on that one last week because we were talking about, well, is that a monster nudie? And it's like, I guess it is, but it's also like a burlesque movie, and both of those genres by 65 were dying out. So like, it's, people wanted to see sex in movies. So while that was happening, but then the Ruffies were built on this frustration. And I think that's kind of what the Sinister Urge has, which is that sense of frustration of like, we can see naked girls, but we can't touch them. So I'm going to kill them instead. It's very much, that's kind of the Ruffy ethos, which is like, if the only way I'm going to touch a woman is if I'm going to be brutally murdering her or beating the shit out of her.
Yeah. Regarding his prescience, I also, when I was just watching the movie again today, I thought there's something, there's something almost like 50 or 60 years ahead of its time in this movie, at its anxiety over pornography addiction. Like, I feel like Dirk, could be, a Pornhub incel. Like he could be the guy with like 10 tabs open, shuffling between clips, who's like completely lost touch with the humanity of women, and has become sexually maladjusted from this.
Oh, what's with that creep?
You know what happens when he looks at certain kinds of pictures? Undoubtedly, he got hold of some, and that was that.
Only that isn't that.
Well, and the interesting thing about that is I was thinking about the overall, this movie bludgeons the themes over your head. It's very obvious. So it made me think, oh, right, the President's Commission of Pornography was like a decade later. And that came out with evidence that pornography does not actually impact the moral standards of the people that watch it. It doesn't turn people into deviants, which was then challenged like another decade later by the Reagan administration with the Mies Commission, where it's like, no, pornography is terrible, and because it's tied to the mob, like it is in this movie, then it should go away. So it's really interesting, like over the course of 25 years, because the Mies Commission was 86, so this is 60. So it's like, 26 years, we see this yo-yoing of opinions and thoughts on the industry. Yeah, I definitely get incel vibes from this guy. We're dealing with all these red pill dudes that are kind of like, well, I deserve women, and if I can't get them, I'm going to kill them.
Well, that was my question for Will as well, is like, this cause and effect between pornography and violence against women. Like, is that a belief that you think Ed himself held?
I wonder. I don't know. I mean, if he did, he eventually made a lot of his living in pornography, so he was able to swallow that belief. But I keep coming back to the book Hollywood Rat Race, where like there's a worldview in that book. For those who don't know, Hollywood Rat Race is this posthumously published book that he wrote in the mid 60s. That was it has elements of memoir, but it's also a Hollywood how-to manual mostly. And it's aimed at, the young kids who are fresh off the bus and they've got their fluffy Angora sweaters on and they're going to office auditioning for roles, trying to make it in Hollywood. And the tone of the book keeps going back and forth between Hollywood's great. Hollywood's been good to me. Think of all my old friends, Bela Lugosi, Tom Keane, all these old stars who just loved Hollywood. And boy, I sure love this town. And then the other tone is Hollywood will kill you. It will swallow you up. At every office, there's a producer named Mr. Sleazy. And there's a casting couch on every corner, and you better watch out. And so circling back to your question about did he really believe this? I think maybe he did. I think he had, but I think he could believe a number of things. I believe he was swayable. I think like the parts of that book that show a sort of paranoid and anxious mind about Hollywood, I could imagine being the same mind that would share some of these views about pornography. At the same time, though, pretty much the only thing we know about his attitude towards this movie was in Nightmare of Ecstasy. There's that letter that Rudolph Gray runs that Ed Wood wrote to Anthony Cardoza, who produced Night of the Ghouls. And he's sort of, trying to persuade Anthony Cardoza that everything's okay with Night of the Ghouls. Don't worry. It's going to come out. In the meantime, I'm making a sex film for another distributor, just to pay the bills, basically. And he's very matter of fact about what the movie is. At least in that letter, he's not pretending it's like, oh, I'm making a very, very serious expose about the dangers of pornography. He's saying, no, I'm making a sex film.
Pornography. A nasty word for a dirty business.
I was going to ask you about, the origins of this movie. There was a script I read, the original script was called Racket Queen. And it kind of floated, some footage was shot by George Weiss, and then it was kind of sold to Conrad Brooks, and then they sold it to Roy Reed. Is this all accurate?
That is accurate. I mean, the parts of the movie that look like they were another movie
this is all the
were
Hellbourne
another
stuff.
They were another movie. That it was this juvenile delinquency project that was shot at various times in the 1950s. It was a joint venture between Ed Wood and Conrad Brooks, who appears in that footage as a sort of a James Dean type, and I think you'll agree. Blows James Dean out of the water with his charisma.
In Conrad's head, yes.
Yeah. And he has that great fight scene with Ed Wood, who I guess is playing a teenager. Ed Wood, probably 35 when he shot this footage, doesn't look at all like a teenager, but nevertheless. And this was supposed to be a project for George Weiss, who produced Glen or Glenda, and I guess they just couldn't get the money for it. So Conrad Brooks bought it, and then I guess I'm not sure about the timeline about when Conrad Brooks bought it, if it was before or after this. It must have been before, but I feel like Ed Wood must have talked to Roy Reed, and Roy Reed at Headliner Pictures had produced The Violent Years based on Ed Wood's script from a few years earlier. And I feel like Ed Wood must have said, look, I've got 10 minutes of footage here, and then I just need to shoot an hour more footage. This is 10 minutes of free material that we can build this movie around. I think that had to have been the pitch. And he probably also said, I can make it really cheap.
Yeah, it's just the only footage is the pizza parlor, and that ice cream shop has to have been from that as well, right?
Because definitely with the girl gang.
Yeah. Because it's like, where did this girl game come from?
Yeah, it is.
It's very Violent Years. I like it.
And it's so clumsily integrated into the film. I mean, at least in the print that I watched, it's like the projector almost seems to break when this footage is stuffed in. The feats of montage that he accomplishes to work this in with Dino Fantini sort of looking inside a window. It feels like I don't know, one of Ray Dennis Steckler's pornos, or
Oh my God, yes. It feels like one of those horrible things where it's just a guy looking into windows. Yes, exactly. Yeah. That is so funny that you made that connection, because I thought the exact same thing. I was like, oh, this is like Steckler. Great.
Did Ed see Psycho? I wonder. I've always read some of these early roughies were all influenced by Psycho, and I guess there is the element of violence against women, but I don't know. Do you see that in this production at all?
I feel that is plausible. I would need to maybe see if I could find out which one was released before which, but if you told me that this came 6 months after Psycho, I would believe you.
I feel like the book because the book came out in 1959, and then that was a hit. I think it was a hit. And then Hitchcock bought the rights and produced that movie himself.
And Ed started writing this script in 1959, so I mean it's possible.
Yeah. So I don't know, it's possible he wrote the book. I don't see a Psycho influence here that much. Maybe based on the book. I always question the roughy thing with Psycho, because I feel like maybe the sexual undertones of the original Psycho, I'm not sure if they were as vividly obvious to people watching them then, not to make people then sound like they were stupid, but we're dealing with people that had been raised under the Hays Code. So, like, there's a certain sexual feel to Psycho, but it's not as vivid. I think people now are able to see.
Right.
So I wonder about that myself. I wonder about the influence of Psycho on roughies. But the book, I could totally see the book being, inspiring kind of that level of stuff.
That's just my personal theory. I think Psycho influenced the roughies more than we give it credit for, but that's a discussion.
Also, the people making the roughies, they're pretty, not to besmirch every person working in sexploitation, but we're not dealing with, they're not always the brightest bulbs. No, they're not. Like, we're talking Harry Novak, Bob Cressy, come on. But Bob Cressy, not the most cultured person in the world.
That's true. Although I do think they probably had a finger up in the air, just checking the temperature of like what's popular now.
That's true.
And also like what's showable now. I'm sure the Psycho shower scene must have been felt in that community as just a precedent of the sort of thing you could show.
Well, yeah, and you see that in Sinister Urge, when Dirk is ripping some of these girls' shirts off. It's that same kind of white bra that you see in Psycho. I don't know, maybe that's just me.
Right. There were also like 8mm loops were definitely a thing then. So like there were lingerie loops and arcade loops and stuff like that with women in that kind of lingerie. So that's the kind of pornography that this movie is actually referencing. It's not necessarily sexploitation films, it's photography and loops. And, I think that kind of gets forgotten in the discussion of pornography. I do it too, where I'm like, oh, right, Playboy is technically pornography. Like the Irving Klaw loops with Betty Page basically in lingerie, tying a woman up. That's technically pornography. So like, I feel like that visual style or lack of any real style in that stuff is definitely more influential on something like Sinister Urge. I feel like Ed had to have had some knowledge of that stuff just from being a good old boy, in Los Angeles.
Definitely. And also, he had contributed to burlesque films. There was that short film that I think was discovered within the last couple of years, Flame of Islam, also known as Cleopatra Follies, that he wrote narration for. And I think that was a George Weiss production. Certainly he was also in the orbit of having worked for George Weiss, who produced a ton of burlesque type movies. He would have been exposed to that sort of thing.
Rotten smut. You were expecting dancing girls, Inspector? This is no laughing matter. I'm sorry, it wasn't bad taste.
Kind of closing the book on the production of Sinister Urge. Yeah, I read in Rudolph's book that it played 42nd Street for 13 weeks, which seems pretty good for an Ed Wood film, wouldn't you say?
I would not be surprised if this movie made some money. Roy Reed at Headliner, he was a businessman. He was much more of a businessman than Ed Wood was. I think The Violent Years probably made a lot of money too. But watching The Sinister Urge, it's like so kind of second rate in a lot of ways, just in its production, in the stars who were in it. It feels like a sort of, it feels like something that would have been packed as like the second half of a double bill a lot. And maybe it's sort of coasted along on 42nd Street that way. I struggle to believe that the audiences would have been that crazy about it, but I think it just had enough exploitable elements that I'm sure it made its money back.
Yeah. I feel like the marketing was done well enough. The one sheet looks good. It's got a good title. Sometimes that's all you need, right?
Yeah.
Right. Actually, what this makes me think more of, not Psycho, is Peeping Tom, the Michael Powell
Definitely.
movie. I feel like that might have been more, and it's a photographer working in pornography who then starts murdering women. So that's, I feel like Peeping Tom might be a more vivid inspiration, but I need to know, like you said, Will, I'd love to see like the release dates of that in the US, because I know it was tough going in the UK, just to see what kind of influence that could potentially have had on films like Sinister Urge and Scum of the Earth and things like that.
Yeah.
Man, I want to believe he saw that one, although that one was such a failure at the time that
I know.
I wonder if it got to him. Yeah.
Yeah, you have to wonder if it made its way to LA. Yeah, because that basically effectively killed Michael Powell's career. But it's very interesting to note that, like, yeah, this guy who's a photographer is also killing women.
Mm-hmm.
So what happened after this production? Immediately after, he didn't publish his first book till 1963, was it, Will?
Yeah, I'm struggling to remember the dates. I think the first one was called Raped in the Grass. And
good grief.
What a title. What a title.
Good Lord.
Well,
just right out the gate.
It's from this movie. It could be, there's a
good grief. What a title.
And,
wow.
Pretty early on, he developed a working relationship with Noel Bloom, who ran a company called Pendulum Press, which was basically his main employer for the last 15 years of his life or so. He wrote, at least 50, almost certainly over 100 paperback books, not to mention hundreds upon hundreds of short stories and essays for adult magazines. And I like some of these books, you can tell that he's getting paid by the word, or rather you can tell that he's like, he's at the typewriter, he starts writing, and then once he gets to 135 pages, he stops writing. And I don't think he's on most of them. I don't think he's necessarily outlining it in advance. So they're very kind of episodic. It's scene, and then it's over. But I think he was talented to a degree. Like there's a talent in being able to produce that much writing and have it be coherent. And I think in his best books, there's a sort of joy of storytelling in them. I think Carnival Piece, for example, is kind of a fun book. It's kind of a yarn. And because he's writing that stuff so quickly, stuff seems to be kind of coming straight out of his subconscious, or he's just laying it on a slab for some of them. So you read a book like Diary of a Transvestite Hooker, and there's a lot of Ed in that book. Actually, that's a book that also has resonances with the Sinister Urge, because it's another story about, somebody who came to Hollywood and immediately found themselves in the gutter and is sort of ruining that. And you can wonder, how much in the Sinister Urge, how much some of these female characters who come in and are caught up in Johnny Ride's, pornography ring, how much of that is Ed feeling a little autobiographical?
Yeah.
Right.
Well, didn't you also say that Carnival Piece kind of had some elements that were in Shotgun Wedding as well?
That's right. They have a very similar story because it's a girl who, she's at a carnival or she's at this, middle of nowhere place, and she's sort of outrunning her past. And there's a sort of a corrupt sheriff figure who remembers her past and is sort of hanging it over her. Yeah.
Yeah. So that's my interest in his books, is to kind of like see those allusions, to other to films that he made. It sounds like there are quite a few.
Boy, she sure looks good to me.
You can say that again.
Say, why don't you sign her up?
Believe I'll do just that.
Gloria said she wanted some new faces.
And that's a pretty nice looking face at that.
Boy, you said it. Say, Billy, come over here, will you?
I have a question, actually, just off the top of my head. Is Noel Bloom the guy? Is the same Noel Bloom that created Caballero Home Video?
That is correct. Actually, okay. So it's. I think Bernie Bloom. I'm mixing up. Bernie Bloom's his dad. Noel Bloom's the son.
Right. So it was Bernie. Okay. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Because I was like, Bloom, why do I know that name? I know that name from Caballero, and I think that's where there was a theory that Ed Wood had actually shot a bunch of the Swedish erotica loops, which Caballero had, and I don't know where that came from, and I guess that is the weird connection. That there's a possibility, but I doubt it.
It's interesting because I've heard that too. I keep hearing that he shot like the first 35 or whatever of the Swedish erotica loops. I don't know what the origin of that is. There are lots of other loops that he did that are clearly like there's at least one loop that he's in, not as a in a non-sex role. It's called
Thank God. Thank you. Yeah.
yeah. It's a one where it's set in a Mexican prison and he plays a sort of Mexican jailer with a sombrero. And that's if anyone wants to see that, it's very easy to find.
Yeah, no, I think I thought Bob Fosse or Bob Voss, not Fosse, Bob Voss did all the early Swedish eroticas. But yeah, I guess that answers that question. I was like, where did that theory come from? That's why the Bloom family. Interesting.
Well, my question for Will is, how come he couldn't find directing work in the early 60s? What happened after this?
I think he had a reputation, frankly, as being a bad director. I know people asked Roy Reed, for example, why didn't he direct The Violent Years, which he wrote? And Roy Reed, I think all Roy Reed ever said was, this other guy was the man for the job. I think Ed Wood was not taken seriously. Sam Arkoff, for example, I think in Nightmare of Ecstasy, he says words to the effect of, in my book, Ed Wood was a loser. Ed Wood was a one-lung producer. And then I think you can't underestimate the impact that his alcoholism had on his decline as well. Because obviously Wood was a good salesman to some degree, like bamboozling the Baptist church, getting that, meat mogul to finish Bride of the Monster. He had a gift of gab, he had salesmanship, but he became unreliable and people didn't want to put their lot in with him. And I think an underrated factor too is I don't know to what extent his vision meshed with the times. Yeah. Stuff like Bride of the Monster is so backwards looking in some ways. Crossroads Avenger, he wants to make movies like the ones that he made when he was a kid. Certainly the market for those types of movies, those types of drive-in movies. I mean, Ed Wood's career is kind of a story of a guy working on the margins in Hollywood from 1950 to 1978. So, it's drive-in movies, and then it's sexploitation, and then it's hardcore pornography. So that's kind of where a guy like that ended up.
I look at this slush and try to remember. At one time I made good movies.
Yeah, so this is pretty much his last main, quote-unquote mainstream film, wouldn't you say?
Yeah, and it's not like he had, the money to make them. So I think there are like 5 years, 1960 to 1965, that are sort of a mysterious period for Ed Wood. I know that there are various things he did. I know that he worked with a mayoral candidate named Sam Yorty on some of his campaign stuff. He did some things, but he seems to have been a little bit out of the movie business between 1960 and 1965 when he comes back with Orgy of the Dead. It just doesn't seem to have been able to adapt to the times. And yeah, he had like several big failures at the end of the 50s. Plan 9 from Outer Space, Night of the Ghouls not getting released. And this, Sinister Urge would not have, it probably made some money, but I don't know. Proof is in the pudding that it didn't do much for his career.
Yeah, I'd read that he had planned a sequel, but that never got off the ground. Do you know much about that? The Peeper?
No, that's all I know. I don't think a script has surfaced for that one.
Yeah.
One of the great things in Nightmare of Ecstasy, though, is there's that great chapter at the end of all of Ed Wood's unproduced ideas. All these things he wanted to make. Like he wanted to make The Life of Mickey Cohen with Paul Marco as Mickey Cohen. I lament that we didn't get that. I know he, in the early 60s, wanted to make a project called The Invasion of the Gigantic Salami, which was supposed to be a sort of horror sci-fi spoof that was going to star Joe E. Brown. Hard to believe that financiers didn't bite on some of these ideas. So I assume he was writing scripts, trying to attract interest.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Well, and The Peeper sounds like it's, obviously going to be like a voyeurism film, which was, voyeurism was a hot topic. So I'm surprised that one didn't get anybody to bite, but I guess nobody wanted to hire him flat out, right?
Yeah. And when I think about when his career kind of, I don't know if it stabilizes, but when he starts making some movies again, or movies, quote unquote, in the late 60s, early 70s, it comes from his connection with Joseph F. Robertson. So there's a flurry of activity with Robertson. And then it comes from his connection to the Blooms. So, writing all of these books for them, and they say we're expanding into feature films or storefront pornography, and he leaps and says, I'll do anything. An interesting footnote to his career, though, is in 1977 or 1978, literally the last year or two of his life, he apparently takes over as director on a movie called Meat Cleaver Massacre, which is a relatively, by a lot of standards, it would be considered a pretty low on the totem pole sort of movie. It was an independent film, largely made by, film students or people just out of film school. Apparently he came on as a photographer, and then he ended up taking over the production as director because the director they hired wasn't competent. And Andrew J. Rausch has interviewed some people involved in the production of this film who attest that Ed Wood completed the film. So he did get that at the very end of his life. And I think that was probably because the people involved in it, or some of the financiers, were movie buffs. And so they knew of Ed Wood from having directed those Bela Lugosi movies. Fred Olen Ray tried writing a script with Ed Wood towards the end of his life. So when I think about what could have happened had he lived, I do think that some of those people who were monster kids in the 50s and 60s might have begun, it seems it already did start to happen, that they were starting to throw him a bone. So he might have gotten some work from that.
That happens every week. Our files are full of Mary Smiths and Jane Does. They come from everywhere USA to star in the movies. Somewhere right now, a Mary Smith is graduating, head of her class. She was great in the school play, and now her starry eyes are looking to the far horizon, Hollywood.
Let's talk about some of the players in this movie. Who do you want to start with, Will? Who's the most exciting actor in this film for you?
Oh man. Well, there's one performance that I think is kind of good, and hang on, I just need to look up the cast list because I'm forgetting what her name is. Yes, Jean Fontaine as Gloria Henderson.
It's all of our favorites. Yeah,
she's kind of everything in this. Yeah,
yeah, hugely charismatic. A much needed dose of charisma in this film. I think you'll agree. Her outfits are amazing. Props to Ed Wood. The decision to have the pornography kingpin be her, this really sassy older woman, I think is an interesting decision.
I had read that she was some kind of singer performer, and those were all her wardrobe changes was all from her act, which that tracks with an Ed Wood film, right?
Let's see those legs. Oh, brother. What's with her?
Sadly, I don't think there's any comparable charisma elsewhere in the cast, although there are people I kind of like here. I mean, as an Ed Wood fan, it's nice to see Kenny Duncan and Duke Moore, here for one last rodeo. Again, I think there's some of the lesser lights in the Wood ensemble, but I mean, they know how to act. Basically, they know how to deliver a line.
They know how to play cops, right?
Basically. And who wants to do that?
And and we alluded to Carl Anthony earlier, who plays one of the cops in Plan 9 from Outer Space. And he plays Johnny Ride, who is one of several characters who could be considered the Ed Wood surrogate in this film. And he's every time I see this movie, I just can't believe some of these line readings. It's like he has a stick up his ass.
Yeah.
He's
great
quite
voice, though.
Challenged. Yes, it seems like it's a great challenge. He does have a good voice. Maybe for a local used car company, he could do a radio ad. But his performance is quite amusing for all the wrong reasons.
Dino Fantini as Dirk Williams, the kind of mad guy who's been driven insane by pornography. I also think he's not quite James Dean. He's certainly trying. He's a little closer to Arch Hall Jr. than James Dean. I'm happy when he's on screen, I guess. Harvey B. Dunn, who's in all the Ed Wood movies, I think comes and hits like a silver bullet in his one scene. As the outraged taxpayer. Yeah.
Yeah, I love him.
Spending all that money on such silly things as a few girly pictures that never hurt anyone.
An unsung hero of this film is Fred Mason as Officer Klein. I mean, on the Mystery Science Theater episode, they joke about him a lot because I feel like every time Officer Klein shows up, just the way Ed Wood edits the film, you kind of expect him to do more. Like Kenny Duncan will say, Klein, come in. And then he'll show you Klein open the door, come out and say, yes, sir. And there's something just about the rhythm of the scene that's a little bit off. It seems to be a grand introduction for Officer Klein, but he says almost nothing. And so, yeah, whenever he's on screen, I don't know, he's an evocative void to me.
Yeah. Imagine if it was Paul Marco again. How great would that have been?
I know.
Paul's not in this.
No, I think I don't know what happened with that. I don't know when their partnership fizzled.
Well, I know that they stayed friends. Like Paul Marco, there were photos of the two of them together in the 70s. I know that Ed Wood and Paul Marco had a bit of a falling out around the time of Plan 9 from Outer Space. I think because Paul Marco put some money into the film and the Baptists took over control. So an argument over him having associate producer credit or not. I mean, he won Paul Marco back by basically tailoring Night of the Ghouls around him, making Night of the Ghouls the Kelton movie. And you'll notice that Paul Marco has an associate producer credit on Night of the Ghouls, probably because he put in some money for it. And if you put in some money for an Ed Wood movie, you'll probably get a bigger role.
As history has shown. Yes.
I am disappointed you're not wearing your Kelton shirt right now, Will.
I know. Well, I wear that on only very special occasions because I don't want to put it through the wash too much.
Yes, of course.
It's worth its weight in gold, my Paul Marco shirt.
I wouldn't wear it either. I have shirts like that are literally on hangers in plastic wrap in my closet that will not be worn again. They need to be protected.
So how did Ed connect with Keaton here? Harry.
I wish I knew that. I don't know, but Harry Keaton, aside from Gene Fontaine, I think is the most natural screen presence in the film. I think he's a little underutilized, if anything. A couple of his comic beats, I think, kind of hit, when they're in the park and he's making a joke about his fake accent. I don't know. I think he's pretty funny. Yeah, I'm assuming Buster never met Ed Wood. I would love it if he came to visit on the set, but history does not suggest that happens.
No. Well, actually, was he shooting Limelight at the time? No, Limelight was a little earlier than this. I was like, it's kind of interesting to think about, like, if he was shooting this Charlie Chaplin movie where these two guys met in the prime of their years to share scenes together. And then on the other side is Harry Keaton in the Sinister Urge. Not at all the same. Yeah.
I mean, what I will say about that is there was a profile of Chaplin in the New Yorker magazine in 1952, I think, just before he was exiled from the country. And it was, I think, Lillian Ross was following him around as he was in New York promoting Limelight. And they went to 42nd Street where he used to perform when he was in vaudeville. And she records him looking up at a marquee and saying, Bela Lugosi meets a Brooklyn gorilla. So, in the pages of the New Yorker magazine, we have Charlie Chaplin reacting to that title.
Good grief. That's classic. The best thing about that movie, it made a good quote for Charlie Chaplin.
Yeah.
Who is this Henry? It sounds like a Hawaiian last name. He plays like that little sex freak guy with the whip. Who is this guy? He is so funny.
Yeah, I don't know, but he's also, sorry, when I say that there are only two charismatic people in the movie, I should have said three. There's also him.
Yes.
Yeah, he's not bad. Yeah.
He looks like
he forgot, he just stumbled onto the set. Like it was an accident. Yeah. I don't know. Was he a grip maybe? Who knows?
How do you guys like the scenes of pornography and filming pornography? Because some of the scenes where like she's wearing a huge robe, pretty easy to make fun of.
The most clothing ever. Yeah.
Yeah. And then she disrobes in the silhouette though, right? Is that the assumption?
The silhouette, my God. Yeah. I mean,
this was an
another reason.
Quote, actually, when they were like, "We're going to put you in more clothing than you've ever worn in your life." It's like, yes, exactly. Yeah.
The silhouette scene is so funny, and they in the MST3K version they cut out the one scene of toplessness, and in the print that I watched, you could tell that the one scene of bare breasts had been run through the projector a lot more times than all the other scenes. But there's that, and then there's that silhouette, or there's the shadow of the woman with the shape of her breast against the wall. And I remember I saw that and I thought, this definitely feels like something from the 1930s. This feels like a sort of roadshow exploitation movie in the sheer paucity of what it's offering.
Right. Well, then that makes me think, were they trying to aim for a more... Was it trying to be respectable in any way? I mean, it is anti-pornography, so it's hard to even call it like a sexploitation movie or a sex movie, because it feels like it's chastising the very industry that it's kind of an active part of. So it's, I don't know if they were trying to make it more mainstream than that.
Yeah, if I'm speculating, I think that this is a movie made by some, older men who are a little bit uncertain about what the rules are. Roy Reed, Ed Wood, these are guys who, would have grown up in or come of age in the industry in the tail end of the roadshow era. And I think their heads are still a little bit in that space still. I don't think the seismic impact of the immoral Mr. T's has quite reached them.
The roughest or the most explicit it gets is probably in the photos that they show. There you kind of see light bondage in those photos that those, what are they, 4x8s? I don't know the dimensions of them that they explain in the movie, but you can kind of see.
They're not 8x10s. No, they're not 8x10s. There's some weird dimension.
Yeah. Right. You can kind of see a girl lying on a bed, and it looks like she might be bound. I'd have to look at it again.
Yeah. Well, the version I saw had the victim at the beginning with her boob hanging out of her breast. So you see this corpse kind of semi-topless twice. There's 2 shots of it. And I was like, I definitely don't remember that. So, it sounds like we need a definitive version of this. Yeah.
When I watched it too, I couldn't tell if it's kind of washed out. I was like, am I seeing what I think I'm seeing or not?
Yeah. And I think that version didn't only come out in Canada. I think it came out on one VHS tape decades ago. Because the S'mores Entertainment version, I believe, is censored.
Yeah, so what's the status, Will, of the estate right now? And, specifically something like Sinister Urge even?
Well, Ed Wood's work is in a bit of a lot of it is, well, I think the short answer is most of it, except for the stuff that he made with Stephen Apostoloff, is basically public domain. But with the huge caveat that Wade Williams, the Kansas-based entrepreneur, sat on it for pretty much most of his life, from the time that Ed Wood became famous to his death. I mean, if anybody was interested in watching these movies in the 90s, the 2000s, I'm sure they'll remember the DVDs and VHS tapes that had the Wade Williams collection on them. I used to go to the store and I would see this and I would see that name. I think, wow, Wade Williams, who's he? He must be some big deal. And of course he wasn't. He was just a guy who liked 50s science fiction movies, who was independently wealthy, who had the means to buy up a lot of the negatives, a lot of the prints of these movies. And really kind of, he used a lot of shady, underhanded means to claim ownership of them. I know that Disney, when they made the Ed Wood movie, they basically paid him off. They paid him a certain amount of money to just leave them alone. So he, even Disney looked at him and said, not worth it. And now, Wade Williams passed away a few years ago. He'd been probably in ill health before that, so he'd sort of disappeared for a little bit. I know that certain companies, he held on to these Ed Wood movies with an iron fist, and in the last 10 years of his life, certain other companies had started to release them, like, the guys who do riff tracks, for instance, had done stuff with Bride of the Monster and Plan 9 from Outer Space without his permission, without his participation. There are other films that he claimed ownership of. For example, Robot Monster, Invaders from Mars, and Detour all had restorations by people without his participation. I mean, as you know, my friend Justin and I put out a Blu-ray of Revenge of the Dead / Night of the Ghouls. Well, we had access to a 35 millimeter print of it. And
Nice.
It was on the market for about a year, basically. So a lot of people got it.
I missed it.
Oh, I'm so sorry.
I missed it. That's okay.
Yeah.
I was destitute for quite a while, and then when I got the money to get it, it was gone. It was my fault.
Well, I'll see if I can find a copy for you.
But don't worry about it. It's fine.
Well, yeah, it was on the market for a while, and then all of a sudden, we got an email from somebody connected with Wade Williams' estate. There was a very not legal sounding email. Let's put it that way. It was not polite. It was not a polite email. It was not very formal. And I mean, we just said, let's, because the thing is, the print that we had, this is what Wade Williams used to do. There were very few prints of Night of the Ghouls / Revenge of the Dead in circulation because he bought them all up. It was a movie that was never theatrically released. And the few prints that were struck in the early 80s, he was able to buy up. And when he released it on video, he changed the title. He changed the title card to Night of the Ghouls, and he added his own copyright notice to it. Now, the original print does not have a copyright notice. And because that print, played in Hollywood, because it played a sneak preview, basically under Night of the Living Dead rules, like it's public domain.
Exactly. Yeah.
And then beyond that, what's the chain of ownership of that movie? Like the guy, the old general who paid for it is long dead. Does Ed Wood's estate have a stake in it? I mean, I'm certainly willing to have that conversation, but it feels like it. I mean, I don't think it's a movie. Any copyright claim wouldn't hold up in court. And the question is, who wants to take Wade Williams' estate to court? Now, this Not movie, you. I mean, the Some More Entertainment release, the big box of wood set that Ted Newsom did. I mean, he worked with Stephen Apostoloff's family to include a lot of that stuff. And I think he treated everything else as public domain, basically, that was in there. And his attitude was very much like, if Wade wants to come for me, come at me. And I think a lot of people who have put out Ed Wood's stuff have had that approach. This movie in particular, I mean, headliner productions, I don't know. I mean, The Violent Years is basically treated as public domain. I think this movie is basically treated as public domain as well. Maybe Roy Reed has some descendants out there who could sit on it if they wanted to. I don't know, but I think this movie is basically public domain.
Yeah. So it's a case of like someone could probably try to release it if they wanted to, but it might be a headache. And is it even worth it? Is that the consensus?
Yeah. And this is why so few of Ed Wood's movies have good high definition releases. And it's also because I think Wade Williams hoarded all the best elements. So for example, Glen or Glenda, there's a version of that movie that Something Weird and the American Genre Film Archive have been playing, theatrically for the last couple of years. That's quite a dodgy print. Like it's a scan of a really incomplete and battered print. And I think it's because Wade Williams just bought all the good elements. So if somebody wants to negotiate with his estate and, get the elements from them, I keep hearing rumors year after year that Film Detective has worked with the estate. I hope some of these movies and the elements that Wade Williams had can be released.
So essentially, if like Sinister Urge has a copyright notice on it and it was released theatrically with that copyright notice, Headliner Productions would still have the copyright to that. But if Headliner Productions isn't around, that means it's orphaned. And so that's unfortunately what a lot of these movies we run into is that they're orphaned because they are protected by copyright legally, but nobody's going to enforce it because the chain of title is up in the air. So who knows? That's a lot of the Something Weird stuff is very, very that where there is copyright protection on them, but nobody knows who to contact to get approval or if there are better elements even.
Absolutely. And so a lot of the stuff that's assumed to be public domain, it's almost like common law more than anything. If one company puts it out, another company puts it out, they test the waters of it. And it's mostly companies that have gone out of business that have been orphaned, as you said.
Just like the others.
Pretty kid, too.
Yeah, she doesn't look much like a kid now.
Maybe she grew up during that moment of truth, as she died.
If someone did a Kelton trilogy, either a box or, some kind of special edition, I think it would do well. That's, his most popular films, and especially Night of the Ghouls. Like, I hadn't seen that until just recently because it was so hard to find. And even the version I watched looked like crap. So I hope that in my lifetime we get something restored because, I think it would open up these films again to a new audience, in HD or shit. I don't know if they could do UHD, how that would look. I think it would be kind of miraculous.
Yeah. I remember, I think it was it Blu-ray.com? I forget. Somebody was trying to work with Wade Williams. Oh, I know who it was. It was the guy from the 3D Film Archive who was commenting, I think, on another forum. And he was trying to get Robot Monster away from him because he wanted to restore it to full 3D. And he said, and he tried working with Wade for years and years and years. And he said it was very difficult because he would always demand so much money. And another thing I remember about Wade, just before we move on, was I think he had it stipulated in his will that Rocket Ship XM he would never let the MST3K episode be reissued because he hated that they lampooned that movie because he said it was the most important sci-fi movie ever made. And he refused to let it be sub-licensed for home video either because he didn't trust anybody to treat it the way that it should have been treated. So he included that in his will, I think he said. So his estate, that MST3K episode will never come back out, and I don't think that movie will ever come back out. Yeah, I mean that's the mindset of this person. We have film collectors that kind of function like this now too. Actually, Wade Williams, that's basically what he was a print collector. Just because you buy the elements of something doesn't mean you own the rights to something. There's physical property and there's intellectual property. You don't have the intellectual property of these movies, sir. It doesn't work.
Well, and this case with Rocket Ship XM is so fucked. I mean, I think at this point it becomes incumbent upon his heirs to not honor that. I mean, that's not a reasonable thing. Yeah.
No, it's that's a reason to contest the whole will altogether. This person was not of sound mind when they had this done, because what kind of stipulation is this? So I think there was some grain of hope that when he passed away that something, and I think he passed away 23, so we're talking very recent. Somebody should be able to do something. I guess we just got
and the thing about Night of the Ghouls, everybody, if they want to defend Wade Williams, they'll say, well, he saved Night of the Ghouls from the lab. He actually didn't. Sure. It was other people who did that. He just bought it. He spread a lot of misinformation about that. That movie played in theaters, on the repertory circuit in the early 80s for like a year before Wade Williams had anything to do with it. Yeah.
You are blowing my mind right now because I believe the propaganda. I believe that he saved that movie and that was his movie, quote unquote. Wow. I've been hoodwinked for decades. Wow.
Yeah.
Thank you for that. Oh my gosh.
The syndicate has big money invested in your business, and we take no chances. Do I make myself clear?
When is your book coming out? Did we mention this?
I should mention that.
Let's do a last minute plug.
Yeah, so if you order it from orbooks.com, which is the publisher, Orbooks, it will ship now. However, if you order it from your local bookstore or Shamazon, as I like to call it, it will ship in October. And it was originally supposed to. Yeah, I know. Well, the reason for it, I'm happy to say, is because, it was supposed to come out on Amazon in July, and the pre-orders were a little bit better than they thought they would be, so they wanted a few more months to promote it. I mean, I guess that's good news. That's nice. I'll say if you order it from orbooks.com is the best place to order it, and you'll get it very soon if you order it from there.
Now, what about Shirley?
Dirk's already carried out your orders, just as he has the others. She won't be bothering you anymore.
Well, Will, I am excited to read your book and read your chapter on the Sinister Urge. Do you have any last thoughts about kind of how this fits into the Ed Wood canon for you?
Well, there are so few interviews with Ed Wood. I mean, he was interviewed about Bela Lugosi a couple of times. Nightmare of Ecstasy has quotes from him from those interviews. But there's no like Hitchcock Truffaut about his films. There are films he made that we have no idea, what he thought of. And that is frustrating in some ways, but it also leaves them kind of evocative and open-ended in other ways. Because, we could talk about the death of the author, but when a filmmaker weighs in on their intentions, that really does, color the legacy of those films sometimes. And there are just so many decisions in this movie that I sort of wish Ed was around to explain, but then I'm also happy he's not at the same time. Whether it's the fact that Johnny Ride's office is decorated with posters for Ed Wood's movies, and he says, I used to make good movies. What are the autobiographical implications of that? What about, in the first scene, the first, doomed starlet who Dino Fantini kills is named Shirley, which is Ed Wood's drag name. And then to say nothing about just the movie's virulent anti-pornography tone and how that squares with the rest of his career. I wish Ed Wood was here to explain some of this stuff, but then again, it's also a bit of a blessing that he's not, because there's something powerful about that mystery.
Thank you for listening. To hear more shows from the Someone's Favorite Productions podcast network, please select the link in the description